everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Welcome once more to another video podcast of PNT Live, exclusively here on YouTube and, of course, on the PNT Live network, which you can access 24 hours, 7 days a week, right over on pntlive.net. Actually, before you watch today's podcast, if you're not already familiar with who Alberto Daniel Hill is, I highly advise that you pop on over to politicalnewstime.com or pntlive.net and watch my first podcast about him. Okay? Now, if you follow me on Twitter, you're already familiar with who he is. Today's podcast is going to, as I said, be a follow-up. It's going to go into detail a bit about just some thoughts that he's had since he has been out of jail. He's out of jail as of current on the equivalent of about a $10,000 US bond. And he has a job. He can live his life pretty well from here on. And to be honest with you, I don't think Alberto's going to particularly like this podcast that I do about his situation, at least not at first. He will definitely appreciate it years later, because in this podcast, I'm going to give Alberto some advice that he probably doesn't want to hear, and advice that I feel a lot of men, especially, who label themselves as hackers, need to listen to, because the world is changing very, very, very quickly. It used to be to where nations and countries were fairly isolated and they could do whatever they wanted within their political system. But because now we're moving more towards a global society, soon we're not going to really have borders anymore. But being that the borders will be open globally, that means that as we do have certain humans that are born, certain humans who have basically leapfrogged ahead, evolutionary wise, whether it be via physicality, spirituality, or mentality, the powers that be are going to weed out what they consider to be problems. Some problems immediately will be eliminated. Other problems will likely be given some chances to prove exactly who they really are, to prove what their spirit, what their soul is aligned with. And I think that that's the case of Alberto. This particular podcast, I might end up titling actually, No Good Deed Goes Unpunished. Because I do believe that what initially started Alberto Daniel Hill's story was his desire to fix everything, to do infinite good deeds by finding security holes in various systems. But what I don't think Alberto realized, and what he still does not seem to be able to understand, but he might after he sees this podcast, is that not everyone who designs a system intends for that system to be perfect. Not everybody who designs a system or attains a system from another designer intends for that system to have its flaws pointed out. Sometimes the flaws are actually a part of the design. I learned that when I started my research into the adult entertainment industry. Those of you who have watched me for several years, you know that I'm a sort of a hacker. I'm not a computer hacker, though. I'm a different kind of hacker. Those who are aware of me know that about me. They know I understand a certain type of system very well. And for a very long time, prior to my personal evolution and my personal journey of maturity, I thought, well, if I see a problem, I should be the one to solve it. No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. One thing that initially struck me also about Alberto was how similar in appearance he looks to someone who a few years ago I called a friend. Haven't spoken to him in years though. An individual known as Rob Zakari. I think Alberto needs to research, study, and learn from Rob Zakari, because Rob and Alberto don't just look alike. And I swear, if someone were to do a DNA test on those two, there would be a common ancestor that they have not too many generations ago. That's what I believe. But their lives have been very similar as well. Like Alberto, Rob at one stage in his life thought that he knew everything. He was born into a system that he knew was broken. He decided, all right, I'm going to take it upon myself to be the leader of the system, and I'm going to fix it. And I'm even going to push the envelope as far as I can, because nothing's ever going to happen to me, or so he thought. And then one day, he was arrested, he stood trial, and he was convicted, and he served prison time for obscenity. Not many people in America have served prison time for obscenity, but Rob Zakari did. And the reason that he did was because the powers that be that control this world wanted to make an example of him. And they wanted to tell the populace, see this guy? We don't want anyone else to do what he's done anymore. And if you do it, we're going to punish you. His prison time was actually a warning shot, because it wasn't forever. He got out of jail. He still did try to override the system that he was born into. Once more, he was strategically silenced. And today, every once in a while, you'll hear a peep out of him, but he appears to finally have found happiness. He found a beautiful wife, someone who was very grounded, who could balance him out, and to my knowledge, he has an absolutely beautiful child. Sometimes the most extreme people in our world are people who are out of balance. And over this past week, I have, from a distance, I've only spoken to this man via social media and, Twitter and WhatsApp. That's it. I've gotten to know who Alberto is fairly well. Not too well, but fairly well. I know that he is a very hyperactive person. I think that he is someone who could easily be labeled ADHD, maybe ADD too, definitely OCD. Does that make him a bad person? No, not at all. It just means that he needs to learn how to control himself, which is probably why he's crossed my desk at this point in his life. Alberto needs to calm down. I think Alberto needs to, if he hasn't already, find a therapist, someone who is familiar with dealing with someone who has gone through an incredibly traumatic event. Because what's happened to Alberto didn't happen very long ago. It was only a couple years ago. He still hasn't quite figured out everything that he's been involved in. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a realization that he had when it comes to the system that he was born into. The political system, actually, that he appears to have been born into. The political system of Uruguay. A system which was built upon corruption. Pretty much every South American system or American system, any system politically that's been built within the Americas, be you in North America or South America, it's all built on corruption. It's all built upon European settlers who, for whatever reason, thought that they were better than the indigenous people. These settlers conquered the indigenous people, enslaved them in some cases, brought slaves over from other places. I'm a descendant of those slaves from Africa, and who, for some reason, have thought that they can tell everybody what to do in the new world. Yeah. So, if you want to learn about Uruguay's history, I suggest that you Google Uruguay, because we're not going to go into all of that today. But what Alberto was under the false impression of was that he was born free. He wasn't. He wasn't. Alberto experiences more freedom than most of his peers in his company do, due to the very special sort of ability and mindset that he has. He's incredibly intelligent. But he also enjoys something that I have been talking about here in America for the past year or so. Alberto enjoys something called white privilege in Uruguay. Yes, it exists. In fact, racism is more extreme in Uruguay than it is here in America. That's not a country I would ever desire to visit. What Alberto doesn't seem to understand, he might, but he hasn't acknowledged it yet, is that he is free right now because he has his special ability, which is being a computer security specialist, and because he appears to be Caucasian. For some reason, he doesn't seem to be grateful, and that is what the powers that be are observing right now. When I initially spoke to Alberto, he warned me and he said, you know, a lot of strange things have been happening in my life lately, and they have. And who knows what's going to happen when you talk about the corruption in Uruguay that I have shared with you. That's why I waited a week to do this podcast. Did anything happen? Nothing. Zilch. Zero. Nobody contacted me about his story. So I did more research into when the story was at its height in Uruguay. To Google his story in America using American terms, English, you're not going to find much. But if you speak Spanish, or if you have a translator on your computer, you will find quite a bit, especially if you utilize the keywords Operación Bitcoin. All right. And keep in mind, Uruguay is very small. They have a very small and very controlled media. Now, Alberto did share with me that he approached the media where he lives with his situation. And though some reporters initially were interested in his story, it's never really been told. And the reason why is because, as I said, the media there is controlled by essentially a mafia, organized crime. I believe that Alberto is being monitored very closely as of current. I think that those monitoring him felt that it was okay for him to talk to me. They allowed him to talk to me for a myriad of reasons. One of the reasons being that I was a sort of a test outlet to see if his story picked up any momentum through somebody who's American. Some people have found interest in his story. Others, they've said to me, this is happening all over the world right now, and it is being controlled. So I believe that. Initially, he approached Nicole Eggert to tell his story and to work on a screenplay or a series or a movie. I think that Nicole Eggert and her friends through Baywatch and whatnot, they absolutely should pick up this ball and run with it. Will it go anywhere with me? No, absolutely not. Why? Well, because I'm Black, and I have a history of working with the adult entertainment industry, which in itself is linked to organized crime. Believe it or not, a lot of people think that I'm tied to organized crime. Nothing could be further from the truth. But because of the company that I made the mistake of keeping several years ago, that's the impression that I give a lot of people. Do many people even listen to me? No. That's why I come on here every day and I say whatever the hell I want. Now, initially what happened to Alberto was that he was poking his nose where it really didn't belong, but that's the kind of person he is. He was looking for holes in systems, and he found one. He found a hole in a system, and the particular system that he found a hole in had to do with a medical database. So he reported the problem in this medical database. Because he reported this problem, and because this particular database was probably already a mark for another hacker who was already playing ball with the corruption within the Uruguay government, they decided to pin the hacking on Alberto. Okay, that's what he claims at least. Now, Alberto did stand trial and he was sentenced to prison. Now, here's what happened when he was in prison. When he was in prison, he made friends, which is good. And some of the people that were prisoners in that system, he probably didn't realize in actuality were plants. They wanted to see how smart he actually was and what he was capable of. I think they also were trying to get a gauge as to how much he craves social acceptance, because that is his kryptonite, and that's something that he needs to change. Alberto's at a certain age that a lot of men reach in their lives to where they look around and they're not satisfied with what they have, no matter how much they have. Some people call it a midlife crisis. I call it just the cycle of life. Because of Alberto's abilities, he was seen as somebody who could be very beneficial to organized crime groups. That's what the people who were in prison alongside him assessed. They knew he wasn't a flight risk. He's not overly adventurous. They knew that he wanted to get out of prison. So most prisoners in Uruguay, they have a prison system to where if you're good, slowly but surely, they let you have what would be considered day release or early release. All right. But Alberto was given more leeway, more rope per se, than most prisoners because they wanted to see how bad he wanted to get out of jail. So while he was allowed to be out and about in the general populace, he'd only been in jail about 6 months. And it was unheard of for people to be given as much freedom as he was given. But again, keep in mind, he was arrested due to corruption. You're going to learn how later. He wound up befriending or becoming affiliated, rather, with an individual who later would request of him to illegally enter the database of a bank. All right, now this is what Alberto has shared with me and what he shared with the general public as well. This was a big problem for him. And ironically, the bank that he was asked to hack into was also a bank that he had been a customer of in the past. Later on, and this is the major bomb that Alberto is dropping, and I'm sure that there's other bombs that he will want to drop as well, even though all of this has happened before in other countries. We'll talk about that in another podcast. But it's a system that he got wrapped up in. That's what happened. He did not hack into that bank. He found out later that the individual who befriended him and made that request of him allegedly was the friend of the husband of the judge. It was a female judge who allegedly convicted him and sent him to prison. So basically, it was a female judge who was essentially recruiting him, according to his story, for a crime group, I would assume, that's centralized in Uruguay. Yeah. He decided not to participate with that. His story did get out to a degree. He has received a tremendous amount of attention in Uruguay. People associate him with that anonymous mask, that hacker mask. So, that's something fun and something that would really give him the opportunity, from my perspective, to educate and help a lot of children. And I think that that's his calling. And that's really why I'm making this podcast today, because Alberto has been given quite the gift, being that he is not still in prison, being that he is allowed to still utilize the internet, being that he has been given the privilege to reach out to Americans such as a Nicole Eggert, a girl named Tiffany, me. That right there says that there's someone out there attached to that Uruguay corruption that really does like Alberto and wants to see him become a part of their society that is workable for whatever that system is down there in Uruguay. But he has to realize that. I personally do not feel that there's anything that I can do to promote or to assist Alberto Daniel Hill from the stage on. If he wants me to interview him, I will. That's up to him. But I think he should wait and give himself a chance to heal from the emotional trauma that he went through. Because he did lose a few things that he may have taken for granted. It seems that he lost his girlfriend. He may have lost a bit of status in society due to this situation. And his family's view of him may have changed. But that doesn't mean that he cannot regain those things. But one thing I noticed about Alberto is that though he appears to exude a tremendous amount of confidence, at least when it comes to his own ability, he doesn't seem to embody faith in a higher power. And I can't work with anybody who doesn't believe in God. That's just me. I am a Christian. And though a lot of Christians reject me and think that I'm a fake Christian, I'm not. I'm just a different type of Christian. I believe in the 10 Commandments, and I believe in the golden rule of treating others the way that you would want to be treated. And that's why I'm putting this podcast together as I am today. This is a little tough, some of the things I'm saying, but I'd rather be tough and very real and very honest when it comes to a situation like this, so that Alberto can grow from it. I don't enable certain types of behavior. One thing that I picked up on when it comes to the art of hacking is that there appears to be a train of thought to where certain hackers label themselves as ethical. That's all perspective. I personally don't believe you can have such a thing as an ethical hacker. No. And I'm going to give all of you an example as to why. Let's say that you have someone who's the world's best burglar. Physically, someone who breaks into buildings and stuff, right? They're the world's best burglar. Let's say that this burglar were to decide, all right, I want to show the world that there's a lot of problems, security problems in a lot of buildings. So I'm going to break into all these buildings and I'm going to blog about it on my website. And I'm going to anticipate that the world looks at me as just such a help to society. No. The world would look at such a person in one of two ways. And this is what's happened to Alberto Daniel Hill. People who are scared to death of crime immediately will want such a person dead. But then you have top tier criminals who would look at such a person and think, shit, we either got to bring him over to our side or kill that person, because that person who's the world's best burglar could turn around and create the world's best security company. Breaking into a database nowadays is akin to breaking into a building. Alberto Daniel Hill is a very good burglar. And he has been given a chance to create better systems for the next world's best burglar to try to break into, who in turn will be recruited by either people who are scared of organized crime or organized crime itself. That's what Alberto needs to come to terms with. He does not need to be a vigilante. He's going to get his ass killed. He does not need to put this story out too much, because this story teaches people how to become better burglars. And that is not what the powers that be want. I think Alberto is very creative. I think that he needs to focus. If he really wants to tell a story, he needs to not write it as being factual. He needs to create it as being fictitious. When I said initially that his story is essentially a hybrid of The Sopranos meets The Matrix meets Mr. Robot, I was serious. It is. But can Alberto star in this himself? No, because he's not a trained actor. I know you think you can do everything, Alberto, but you can't. I think that he should write this screenplay. I think that he should shop it around. I think that he should be very patient when it comes to his friendship with Nicole Eggert, because I do believe that she's a woman of her word. And if she says she's going to help you, that's who's supposed to help you. You're not supposed to leapfrog over her and request anything of someone like myself. That in itself is not being ethical. But what I think Alberto really needs to do is work on himself at this stage. I think that he needs to find it within himself to realize the world doesn't revolve around him, that a higher power does exist. I'm not saying he has to be a Christian and believe in God. He could become a Buddhist. He could be, follow Islam. He could become Jewish. I don't know. But he needs to figure something out when it comes to spirituality, because he's completely out of balance. I think he needs to get offline for a little bit and just live life. Get involved in a healthy activity. Meet some local women. Being that he already has quite the fan base in Uruguay, there would be quite a few women who would be interested in him. It's time for him to get into a solid relationship and realize that there are things in life outside of the internet. And I'm talking to you, Alberto, from experience. Took me a while to realize that there's a life offline too. I am going to read to all of you something that Alberto wrote, and it's very good. It's the first page of his book. And when he does release his book, I encourage everybody to purchase it. He should release it through Amazon.com. Here we go. At some point, things can only be forced to take their natural direction by simply talking about them and letting the world know that things might be things nobody is willing or expecting to hear, but must be said. This book has been written because, quote, 3 things can't be hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth, end quote. Being the latter, the one that has the most powerful effect to burn those things that try to hide it. So how about burning down the lies and let the truth be known? I have always played with fire in my life. I am aware of the risks involved, and I am not afraid of writing this book. Taking risks has always been a part of my life. My name is Alberto, and I am an information security professional. I have a story to share with you. It is a real story and includes hacking secrets, lies, corruption, drugs, crimes, near-death experiences, and the list continues. This is like the deep web, but it is not running on computer networks. It is part of the systems that control society, those that establish the rules we are supposed to follow, unless we are outliers. The media gave me the title of #hacker, and I took it to use it for noble purposes. I lost it all. Well, that is partially true. I kept something nobody could ever take from me, and that is my dignity. A bullet in my head might stop me, but even in that case, I am taking my dignity with me. I will share with you the dirtiest secrets of some people who have the benefit of not having to obey those rules set for the rest. And then it signed his name. It's interesting that he does talk about a near-death experience. He did have one. He was out for 2 hours. He was brought back. Again, what Alberto does have to realize about systems is that computer systems are just one tiny fraction of a much bigger system. That bigger system being reality. All that is. And I do encourage Alberto to re-watch the Matrix trilogy. Re-watch it. Because the Matrix movie isn't really about technology. It's about God and having faith. That's the lesson that Neo learned. And I think that that's the lesson that Alberto is meant to learn. To the men out there, because it is mostly guys, there's some women who are hackers too, but they don't tend to seek fame from it. To the men out there who are seeking attention, who want to be freedom fighters, who call yourselves ethical hackers, I encourage all of you this coming Sunday to go to your local church. And realize that the system that you really want to hack is God's system to make it better. Computer systems, most of you hackers out there, you're already obsolete because these kids coming up, they're so much smarter than even the smartest lot of you. Focus on having a family, because when it comes to Alberto's story, his story is akin to an 80s movie, one of my favorite movies, called The Never Ending Story. He's still in his story. And guess what? I'm a character in it. But it's not ready to be told yet. I'll tell you who I think is going to be the one to tell Alberto's story properly. His future child that has not been born yet. He needs to go and find the mother of his future child. A child that will be far more intelligent and far more balanced than Alberto could ever dream to be. And the mother of that future child, I believe, probably lives right in his community in Uruguay. So I hope he meets her soon. When he does, I hope he writes about it. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful day. I know this podcast wasn't what you expected, but that's what the PNT Live Network is all about.